A peaceful day at the park takes a shocking turn when a rude woman's mistreatment of a stray dog sets off a chain of dramatic events. As tensions rise, an unexpected stranger steps in, leaving everyone stunned. But what happens when the community discovers the power of compassion and the identity of their unlikely hero? Stay tuned to find out, and don't forget to share where you're watching from in the comments below. The distant hum of laughter and playful chatter filtered through the park, but Ethan Blake remained focused on his sketch pad. His pencil danced across the page, bringing to life the image of a stray dog that had been lingering around the park for weeks. Ethan had named the scruffy mutt Buddy, though they weren't formally acquainted. The dog was cautious but curious, inching closer to him every time he visited. Ethan didn't mind. In fact, Buddy was the only reason he bothered coming here anymore. The corporate grind had drained him of energy, leaving him desperate for a spark of connection or purpose. Buddy, with his floppy ears and mismatched fur, had become that spark of quiet, unspoken companionship. "Hey, Buddy," Ethan called softly, sliding a piece of turkey from his sandwich and tossing it a few feet away. The dog's nose twitched before he cautiously approached, tail wagging tentatively. Buddy's wary steps tugged at Ethan's heart. "Not everyone's out to hurt you, you know." Buddy grabbed the morsel and darted back to the shade of a nearby oak tree. Ethan chuckled under his breath. They had established this routine, a fragile dance of trust. But the park wasn't only for quiet sketches and fleeting connections. Across the way, families gathered around playgrounds, couples strolled hand in hand, and joggers looped endlessly around the trails. It was a lively, dynamic space, and Ethan liked the background noise. It made his world feel less lonely. That serenity shattered when a voice cut through the air like glass on stone. "Who let that mangy thing in here?" A woman's sharp tone carried across the park, drawing the attention of several bystanders. Ethan's pencil paused mid-stroke, and his eyes followed the commotion. A tall, sharply dressed woman in oversized sunglasses and heels, not exactly park attire, was pointing furiously at Buddy, who had frozen under her glare. Ethan's stomach tightened. "Get out of here, you filthy mutt," the woman barked, waving her handbag as if shooing away a fly. She took a threatening step toward Buddy, who scrambled backward, tail tucked between his legs. Ethan stood, his sketch pad slipping from his lap onto the grass. He wasn't someone who sought conflict, but something inside him pushed him forward. The woman wasn't finished. "I pay taxes for this park. I don't come here to step in dog filth from some stray." Buddy whimpered as the woman took another step closer. Ethan's stride quickened. "Hey, leave him alone," he called out, voice firmer than he expected. The woman turned sharply, her face twisting into an annoyed sneer. "Excuse me? Who are you to tell me what to do?" Ethan squared his shoulders, his heart pounding. He's not bothering anyone. He's just a stray trying to survive. "Exactly," she jabbed a finger in his direction. "He's a stray, probably carrying diseases. Someone needs to take care of it before he bites a child." The words hit Ethan like a slap. He glanced back at Buddy, who cowered further into the shadows. He couldn't fathom the cruelty laced in her voice, as if Buddy were nothing more than a pest. "I'll take care of him," Ethan replied, his voice resolute. "You don't need to worry about him." The woman scoffed. "Oh, please. People like you always bleeding hearts for these disgusting creatures. Next thing we know, we'll have a pack of them overrunning the park." Her words drew murmurs from a growing group of onlookers. Some nodded in quiet agreement, while others exchanged uneasy glances. Ethan clenched his fists, his frustration building. Unbeknownst to either of them, another figure was watching the scene unfold from a distance. Seated casually on a bench, dressed in jeans and a plain hoodie, Keanu Reeves observed with quiet intensity. His presence went unnoticed, his face partially obscured by a baseball cap, but his eyes betrayed a mix of concern and curiosity. Ethan took a step toward the woman, keeping his voice steady. "I don't know what's more disgusting, an innocent dog trying to survive or someone who goes out of their way to hurt him." The woman's cheeks flushed red, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to form a retort. Before she could respond, a jogger stopped nearby, offering a tentative defense. "He's right, you know, that dog isn't hurting anyone." The woman's gaze darted between Ethan, the jogger, and Buddy. Sensing she was outnumbered, she crossed her arms and muttered, "Fine, do what you want." Just don't expect me to deal with it when that thing turns on someone. With that, she stomped off, heels clicking angrily against the pavement. Ethan exhaled, his hands unclenching. He turned to Buddy, who was still trembling beneath the tree. "It's okay, Buddy. She's gone." From his bench, Keanu allowed himself the smallest of smiles. It wasn't over, not yet, but he liked the kid's spirit. Ethan stayed by Buddy's side after the confrontation, crouching low to let the dog sniff his hand. It was a silent gesture, an offering of safety. Buddy hesitated but eventually inched closer, his tail wagging in slow, uncertain arcs. "See? Not so scary, right?" Ethan murmured, scratching behind Buddy's ear when the dog finally allowed it. The soft, scruffy fur was warm under his hand, and for a brief moment Ethan felt a surge of satisfaction. He'd stood up for Buddy, and the dog seemed to know it. But the peace didn't last long. A familiar voice, sharp and grating, interrupted the quiet. "Unbelievable. You're still here? With that thing?" Ethan turned his head and saw the woman from earlier marching back toward him. This time she had back up a park ranger, his uniform crisp but his demeanor already weary from whatever tale she'd spun. The ranger looked at Ethan, then at Buddy, who had pressed himself into Ethan's side. "Sir, we've received a complaint about a stray dog. Is this your pet?" "He's not mine," Ethan admitted, keeping his voice calm, though his heart began to race. "He's a stray that hangs around the park. I've been feeding him." The woman pounced on the admission. "You see, he's encouraging it. That's why this dog is always here, scaring off the kids and ruining the park for everyone." The ranger raised a hand to silence her, his tone measured. "Maham, let me handle this." Ethan stood, placing himself between Buddy and the ranger. "He's not scaring anyone," he said. "He's harmless. I've been coming here for weeks, and he's never caused any trouble." The ranger sighed, looking conflicted. "I get that, but rules are rules. We can't have stray animals roaming the park." Buddy let out a small whine, as if he understood the ranger's words. Ethan glanced down at the dog, his chest tightening. What's going to happen to him? The ranger shifted uncomfortably. If he doesn't have an owner, animal control will have to pick him up. From there, it's up to the shelter. And what if the shelter's full? Ethan pressed. The ranger didn't answer, but his silence spoke volumes. The unspoken truth hung heavy in the air. Buddy might not make it out of the shelter alive. "No," Ethan said firmly. "That's not happening. I'll take him home with me." The woman threw up her hands in exasperation. "Oh, great. So now this bleeding heart is just going to adopt every stray he sees? What happens when it bites someone, or spreads fleas? People like you don't think about the consequences." Ethan felt the heat rising in his cheeks, his frustration bubbling over. "People like me," he shot back. "You mean people who care? Because clearly that's too much to ask." A small crowd had begun to form again, drawn by the escalating tension. Among them, Keanu watched from his bench, his face unreadable but his posture slightly more alert. He leaned forward, his hands clasped loosely in front of him, as if ready to step in. The ranger held up his hands, trying to defuse the situation. "All right, let's all calm down. Sir, if you're serious about taking responsibility for this dog, that's a solution we can work with, but you'll need to prove ownership and get him vaccinated. Until then—" "I'll take care of it," Ethan interrupted, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "Whatever it takes. Just don't let animal control take him." The ranger nodded reluctantly. "Okay, but you'll need to keep him on a leash from now on." Ethan knelt beside Buddy, running a hand gently along the dog's back. "You hear that, Buddy? Looks like we're sticking together." Buddy's tail thumped weakly against the ground, a flicker of trust in his eyes. Ethan felt a swell of determination. He wasn't going to let this dog down. As the ranger began to disperse the crowd, the woman muttered something under her breath and stormed off again. The tension in the air eased, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Keanu rose from his bench and approached, his steps unhurried but deliberate. Ethan noticed him for the first time and blinked, caught off guard by the man's familiar face. "You handled that well," Keanu said, his voice calm and measured. "Not everyone would have stood up like that." Ethan stammered, suddenly feeling self-conscious. Thanks. I just couldn't let her scare him like that. Keanu nodded, his eyes softening as he glanced at Buddy. Sometimes it takes just one person to make a difference, but it doesn't hurt to have a little help. Ethan tilted his head, unsure of what he meant, but Keanu simply smiled and extended a hand. Keanu. Ethan, he replied, shaking the offered hand. Ethan, Keanu repeated, his tone thoughtful. I have a feeling this won't be the last time we cross paths. Before Ethan could respond, Keanu turned and walked away, leaving him with Buddy in a lingering sense that something bigger had just begun. Ethan spent the next few days preparing to bring Buddy home. The moment at the park had solidified his decision, and after a quick trip to the pet store for supplies, a leash, a collar, and some food, he was ready to take Buddy into his small apartment. It wasn't much, but it was a safe space for them both. Buddy adjusted surprisingly well to indoor life. At first he was skittish, flinching at loud noises or sudden movements, but Ethan's patience paid off. He spoke softly, always crouching low when he approached, and within a few days Buddy had started wagging his tail at the sight of him. Ethan was beginning to feel hopeful that the dog's difficult past could be left behind. Then Karen Sterling returned. Ethan was back at the park, taking Buddy for a walk. The dog had his new collar on, complete with a tag bearing Ethan's name and number. Buddy walked beside him, his tail wagging happily as they navigated the trails. Ethan had just settled onto a bench to sketch while Buddy rested at his feet when he heard her voice again. Unbelievable. He still heard Karen's tone was sharper than ever, her heels clicking loudly as she approached. Ethan looked up, already bracing himself. What now, he asked, his voice weary but firm. Karen stood before him, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. That dog shouldn't be here. You're putting people at risk. He's on a leash, Ethan replied, gesturing toward Buddy, who was lying quietly at his feet. He's not bothering anyone. Karen's face twisted in frustration. It's not just about a leash. That thing is a stray. Who knows what kind of diseases it has? It's irresponsible. Ethan set his sketchpad aside and rose to his feet, his chest tightening with anger. He's not a stray anymore. He's my dog, and he's healthy. I took him to the vet. Karen scoffed. Oh, so now you're a hero? You think adopting one dog changes anything? It changes everything for him, Ethan shot back, his voice rising. Why is that such a problem for you? The growing argument began to draw attention. Parkgoers paused their conversations and activities, turning to watch the escalating confrontation. Among them, Keanu Reeves once again sat quietly on a bench, observing the scene with a measured gaze. He leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees as he listened. Karen wasn't finished. You're just enabling the problem. Dogs like that shouldn't be roaming free. It's dangerous, and it sends the wrong message. Ethan felt his temper flare. The only dangerous thing here is your attitude. This park is supposed to be a place for everyone, humans and animals, but you've turned it into your personal battleground. Karen took a step closer, her voice lowering but no less venomous. Listen, kid. People like you, soft-hearted and naive, you don't get how the world works. You think kindness solves everything, but it doesn't. Maybe not, Ethan replied, his voice steady despite the tightness in his throat. But it's a damn good place to start. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd as Ethan's words struck a chord. Karen glanced around, realizing she was losing the support she'd hoped to gain. Her face flushed red with embarrassment, but before she could respond, another voice cut through the tension. Kindness doesn't just solve things, it inspires people. Keanu Reeves stood, his presence commanding yet unassuming. The crowd turned to him, their surprise evident as recognition dawned. He approached Ethan and Karen, his expression calm but resolute. Karen blinked, clearly caught off guard. Wait, are you? Keanu nodded slightly but didn't let her finish. I've been watching this situation unfold, and I have to say, I'm impressed with how Ethan has handled himself. He's shown courage, empathy, and responsibility, qualities we could all stand to practice a bit more. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. The crowd murmured in agreement, their focus now entirely on Keanu. he crouched down beside Buddy, who wagged his tail cautiously. And as for Buddy, here Keanu continued, gently scratching behind the dog's ears, he's proof that everyone deserves a second chance, even strays. Ethan's heart swelled with gratitude as he watched Keanu interact with Buddy. The actor's presence had shifted the energy entirely, and Karen seemed to sense it. She straightened her posture, her face a mixture of indignation and resignation. "Well," Karen finally said, her voice clipped, "if you all want to deal with the consequences, that's on you." She turned on her heel and stormed off, her heels clicking furiously against the pavement. The crowd began to disperse, but not before several people approached Ethan to offer words of encouragement. Keanu stood and clapped Ethan on the shoulder. "You did good, Ethan." "I couldn't have done it without you," Ethan replied, his voice still tinged with awe. Keanu shook his head. "You didn't need me. You just needed to believe in what you were doing. But I'm glad I could help." Ethan watched as Keanu turned and walked away, his figure blending into the flow of parkgoers. Buddy nudged Ethan's hand with his nose, drawing his attention back to the moment. "Looks like we've got someone else in our corner, huh?" Buddy, Ethan said with a smile, scratching the dog's head. Buddy wagged his tail, his trust in Ethan stronger than ever. Ethan sat back down on the bench, his sketchpad forgotten for the moment. The weight of the confrontation lingered, but so did a sense of triumph. He had stood up not just for Buddy, but for the values he believed in. And in doing so, he'd found an ally in the most unexpected of places. The park was quieter the next day, as if the tension from the confrontation had finally settled into a cautious calm. Ethan felt lighter as he walked Buddy along the familiar trails, the dog's leash wrapped loosely around his wrist. Buddy trotted happily beside him, sniffing at patches of grass and wagging his tail at passing squirrels. The morning sun filtered through the trees, dappling the ground with warm light. Ethan breathed in deeply, letting the fresh air clear his thoughts. Yesterday had been intense, but it felt like a victory not just for Buddy but for everyone who had stood up for kindness and fairness. As they rounded a bend near the park's fountain, Ethan caught sight of a familiar figure sitting on a bench. Keanu Reeves was there again, his casual hoodie and jeans making him blend in with the morning joggers and dog walkers. But something about his composed demeanor and quiet presence stood out. Keanu raised a hand in greeting when he saw Ethan approaching. "Hey, Ethan." Ethan's tone carried a mix of surprise and gratitude. "I didn't expect to see you again." Keanu smiled, gesturing to the open spot on the bench. "Mind if I join you for a bit?" Ethan nodded, taking a seat beside him. Buddy immediately plopped down at their feet, his tail wagging as if he, too, recognized the man who had stepped in to help. "How's Buddy holding up?" Keanu asked, reaching down to scratch behind the dog's ears. "Better than ever," Ethan replied. "I think yesterday was a turning point for him and for me." Keanu chuckled softly. "It was a big moment. You handled yourself well." Ethan shrugged, glancing down at Buddy. "I just couldn't let her treat him like that. He's been through enough." Keanu leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "You know, moments like that have a ripple effect. It might seem small standing up for a stray dog in a park, but it inspires others. People see what you did, and it makes them think. Maybe next time they'll act too." Ethan considered his words, a sense of pride and responsibility swelling within him. "I just want Buddy to have a chance. He deserves it." "And you gave him one," Keanu said simply. "But it doesn't stop there. You've got an opportunity to do more if you want to." Ethan tilted his head, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "What do you mean?" Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. It was plain, save for a name and a number printed in elegant lettering. "I've been working with some folks on a new initiative building better shelters and community programs for strays. We focus on education, fostering, and rehabilitation. I think you'd be a great addition." Ethan stared at the card, his mind racing. The offer was unexpected but exciting. "You really think I could help?" "I know you can," Keanu replied, his tone firm but kind. "You've already proven you have the heart for it. The rest is just logistics." Ethan's grip on the card tightened as he nodded slowly. "I'll think about it." Keanu smiled, sensing the young man's hesitation. "No rush. Take your time. It's not an easy commitment, but it's worth it. Their conversation was interrupted by a small commotion near the fountain. A group of children had gathered, giggling and pointing as Buddy wandered over to them. The dog wagged his tail furiously, basking in their attention as they petted him and offered treats from their snack bags. Ethan laughed, watching the scene unfold. Looks like Buddy's making friends. Keanu's gaze softened as he watched the children and the dog. That's what it's all about, connection. We're all better when we care for each other, even in small ways. Ethan looked at him, his chest tightening with a mix of admiration and gratitude. I don't know if I ever said it properly, but thank you for everything. Keanu shook his head, his smile warm. You don't need to thank me. You're the one who made the difference. I just gave a little push. The two sat in companionable silence for a while, watching Buddy play with the kids. The dog, once so timid and unsure, now moved with confidence and joy. It was a stark reminder of how far he'd come and how much further he could go with Ethan by his side. Eventually, Keanu stood, brushing imaginary dust from his jeans. I should get going. Got a few meetings lined up today. Ethan rose too, extending his hand. I'll think about what you said. Keanu clasped Ethan's hand firmly, his smile encouraging. I hope you do. The world needs more people like you. With that, Keanu walked away, his figure disappearing down the path. Ethan watched him go, the business card still clutched in his hand. Buddy trotted back over, his tongue lolling happily as he leaned against Ethan's leg. Ethan crouched down, rubbing the dog's head. What do you think, Buddy? Should we give it a shot? Buddy barked softly, as if in agreement. Ethan laughed, his resolve solidifying. Maybe this was the next step, turning one small act of kindness into something bigger. Something that could change even more lives. As they left the park together, the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting a warm glow over them both. Ethan felt a sense of purpose he hadn't known in years, a spark of hope for what the future could hold. A week had passed since Ethan's conversation with Keanu, but the weight of the business card in his pocket felt heavier each day. Buddy had settled into life at Ethan's apartment, his skittish demeanor replaced by a cautious confidence. Ethan had even taken him to the vet for his vaccinations and a thorough checkup. The vet marveled at how healthy Buddy seemed, despite his life on the streets. Ethan found himself staring at the card one evening, turning it over in his fingers. The name of the organization, Kindred Paws Initiative, was simple yet meaningful. He knew the next step was calling the number, but something held him back. Was he ready to take on more responsibility? To step into a world he knew little about? Buddy stirred at his feet, his head resting on Ethan's sneakers. Ethan smiled down at him, his resolve hardening. If he'd learned anything from this experience, it was that sometimes doing the right thing meant stepping out of your comfort zone. With a deep breath, he grabbed his phone and dialed the number. The voice on the other end was warm and welcoming, and before he knew it, Ethan was scheduling a meeting with the shelter's director. We've been hoping you'd call, the woman said with a smile in her voice. Keanu spoke very highly of you. That weekend, Ethan and Buddy arrived at the shelter. It was a modest building with brightly painted walls and a bustling atmosphere. Volunteers moved between kennels caring for the animals while visitors chatted with staff about adoptions. Ethan could feel the energy of the place, a mix of compassion and determination. Ethan, a cheerful voice called out. A woman in her mid-30s approached, her hand extended. I'm Carla, the director. Welcome to Kindred Paws. Ethan shook her hand, nerves bubbling beneath his calm exterior. Thanks for having me. This place is amazing. Carla grinned, motioning for him to follow her. Let me show you around. We've been running the shelter for about 5 years now, and thanks to people like Keanu, we've been able to expand our reach. As they walked, Carla explained the shelter's programs, adoption events, foster care initiatives, and workshops aimed at educating the community about stray animals. Ethan listened intently, his admiration for the work growing with every word. At the end of the tour, Carla stopped by a bulletin board filled with photos of adopted pets and their new families. This is why we do what we do, she said, her voice softening. Every one of these animals got a second chance because someone cared. Ethan stared at the photos, his mind racing. He thought of Buddy, curled up by his feet each evening, and how far the dog had come in such a short time. How can I help, he asked, the words tumbling out before he could second-guess himself. Carla's face lit up. There are so many ways. You could volunteer at events, help with fostering, or even just spread the word. Every little bit makes a difference. Ethan nodded, feeling a sense of purpose take root. I'll do whatever I can. As they finalized the details of his involvement, Ethan noticed a familiar figure entering the shelter. Keanu Reeves, dressed casually but exuding his signature charisma, waved at him. Hey Ethan, glad to see you here. Ethan laughed, shaking his head. You really do have a way of showing up at the right time. Keanu shrugged, a playful glint in his eyes. I like to make sure my recommendations stick. Carla excused herself to tend to another matter, leaving Ethan and Keanu alone. So Keanu said, leaning casually against the counter, What do you think? This place is incredible, Ethan replied. I can see why you're so passionate about it. Keanu nodded, his expression serious. It's not just about helping animals, it's about creating a culture of empathy and compassion. Every act of kindness, no matter how small, has a ripple effect. Ethan thought back to the park, to Karen's angry words and the crowd that had rallied behind him. It's funny, he said. I used to think I didn't have much to offer. But Buddy changed that. Keanu smiled. Sometimes all it takes is one connection to remind us of what we're capable of. The two men chatted for a while longer before Keanu excused himself, leaving Ethan to explore the shelter further. By the time he left, he had a schedule of volunteer shifts and a renewed sense of purpose. Buddy, as if sensing the change in his owner, walked proudly beside him. That evening, Ethan sat on his couch with Buddy sprawled across his lap. He scrolled through his phone, reading up on the Kindred Paws initiative and brainstorming ways to contribute. Ideas flowed freely: fundraisers, community outreach, even using his art to create awareness campaigns. As Buddy nuzzled his hand, Ethan smiled. Looks like we've got some work to do, Buddy. The dog wagged his tail, as if in agreement. Ethan leaned back, his mind buzzing with possibilities. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The park was alive with activity, more vibrant than Ethan had ever seen. Balloons swayed in the breeze, colorful banners fluttered above makeshift stalls, and the joyful sounds of children's laughter filled the air. This wasn't just any day at the park. It was the launch event for the Kindred Paws initiative's new outreach program. Ethan stood by one of the booths, holding Buddy's leash in one hand and a clipboard in the other. Buddy had been named the unofficial mascot of the initiative, his story of resilience and redemption inspiring countless volunteers and donors. Ethan couldn't help but smile as people approached, eager to meet the dog who had sparked a movement. Is this Buddy? A young girl asked, her wide eyes filled with awe. She crouched down, extending her hand cautiously. Yep, this is Buddy, Ethan replied warmly. Go ahead, you can pet him. He loves the attention. The girl giggled as Buddy sniffed her hand before leaning into her touch. Her parents stood nearby, snapping photos and thanking Ethan for sharing Buddy's story. It was moments like these that reminded Ethan of how far they'd come. The past few months had been a whirlwind. Ethan had fully embraced his role with Kindred Paws, spending his evenings volunteering at the shelter and his weekends organizing events like this one. He'd even started using his artistic talents to create posters and social media graphics, raising awareness about the plight of stray animals. Hey Ethan, Carla's voice cut through the din of the crowd. She waved at him from across the park, walking briskly toward him with a clipboard of her own. You're a hit today. The booth spin nonstop. Ethan grinned. Buddy's the real star. People can't get enough of him. Carla laughed, patting Buddy on the head. Well, whatever it is, it's working. We've already signed up 20 new volunteers and raised enough donations to fund the shelter for the next 6 months. Ethan's chest swelled with pride. That's amazing. Before Carla could respond, a familiar figure appeared in the distance. Keanu Reeves, dressed in his usual understated style, strolled toward them, his presence immediately drawing attention from the crowd. People began murmuring excitedly, their phones raised to capture the moment. Looks like the man of the hour is here, Carla whispered with a smirk. I'll let you two chat. Keanu approached, his easy smile lighting up his face. Ethan, "Buddy, how's it going?" "Better than I ever imagined," Ethan admitted. "This turnout is incredible." Keanu glanced around, nodding appreciatively. "It's a testament to what you've built. This isn't just an event, it's a community." Ethan hesitated, his humility battling with his pride. "I couldn't have done it without you." Keanu waved the comment away. "You had it in you all along. I just gave you a nudge." As they chatted, a group of kids ran up to meet Buddy, their laughter echoing through the park. Keanu crouched down, joining in on the fun as Buddy lapped up the attention. The sight was almost surreal, in a list celebrity playing with kids and a scrappy dog in a public park, but it felt natural, unforced. Karen Sterling's appearance at the event was the biggest surprise of the day. Ethan noticed her standing hesitantly near one of the booths, a look of uncertainty on her face. She seemed out of place among the cheerful crowd, but something about her demeanor was different, softer, less rigid. Ethan decided to approach her, Buddy trotting faithfully at his side. "Karen," he said, his tone neutral but polite, "I didn't expect to see you here." She turned, her expression faltering before settling into a tentative smile. "I heard about the event, and about what you've been doing. I wanted to see it for myself." Ethan nodded, unsure of what to say. Karen glanced down at Buddy, who was staring at her curiously. "That's the dog, isn't it? The one from the park?" "Yeah, this is Buddy," Ethan replied, giving the leash a gentle tug to bring him closer. Karen knelt down, hesitating before reaching out to let Buddy sniff her hand. The dog seemed to sense her unease but wagged his tail anyway, leaning into her touch. Karen's smile grew, though it was tinged with sadness. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," she admitted quietly. "I was wrong to treat him the way I did, to treat you the way I did." Ethan blinked, taken aback by her honesty. "It's never too late to change," he said, his voice gentle. "Buddy's living proof of that." Karen straightened, brushing imaginary dust from her knees. "Is there a way I can help? Donate, maybe?" "There's always room for more support," Ethan replied. "And if you're willing, we could always use more volunteers." Karen hesitated but then nodded. "I'll think about it." As she walked away, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. Karen's small gesture of redemption wasn't just for Buddy or for him, it was for herself. And in its own way, it was a victory. By the end of the day, the park was quiet again, the festivities winding down. Ethan sat on a bench with Buddy sprawled across his lap, his heart full. Keanu joined him, sitting in companionable silence for a while before speaking. "You've done something special here, Ethan," he said, his voice soft but firm. Ethan looked down at Buddy, then out at the park that had become a symbol of hope. "It doesn't feel like it's just mine. It feels like it belongs to everyone who showed up today." Keanu nodded. "And that's what makes it powerful." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the park in a golden glow, Ethan felt a deep sense of contentment. He wasn't just the guy who stood up for a stray dog anymore. He was part of something bigger, something that would continue to grow and inspire others. And as Buddy let out a contented sigh, Ethan knew they were both exactly where they were meant to be,